I had always been the responsible one in my family. Growing up, I excelled in school, earning straight A's, working through college, and securing a well-paying job immediately after graduation. I made careful financial decisions, diligently saving for years with the dream of purchasing my first home. But despite my best efforts, the housing market in my city had become nearly unattainable, with prices soaring beyond what I could afford on my own. Then, about a year ago, during a family dinner, my parents made an announcement that left me overwhelmed with gratitude. With warm smiles, they told me they had been saving for years to help their children with homeownership, and now that I was ready to settle down, they wanted to contribute to my down payment. They assured me that they believed I deserved it, recognizing my years of hard work and financial prudence. It was a heartfelt moment, and when they mentioned a sum of $50,000, I was moved to tears. With their help, I could finally afford a modest but comfortable home in a safe neighborhood. I wasted no time, eagerly diving into the house hunting process. Every weekend, I attended open houses, met with mortgage brokers, and meticulously calculated my budget. After months of searching, I finally found the perfect place. A charming two-bedroom condo close to my workplace, with a small yard where I could finally get the dog I had always wanted. Everything was falling into place. The sellers accepted my offer, contingent on financing, which I was confident about securing with my parents' promised support. Then, 3 days before I needed to provide proof of funds, I called my parents to arrange the transfer. My mother's voice wavered as she asked if she and my father could come over to talk. The hesitation in her tone made my stomach twist with unease. When they arrived, the moment they sat down, I knew something was wrong. "Honey," my mother began, avoiding my eyes, "something's come up with your brother." My heart sank. My brother, at 29, had always been the reckless one, the free spirit. He had dropped out of college twice, drifted between jobs, and had a knack for landing himself in financial trouble. Time and time again, my parents had bailed him out, believing in his endless stream of new beginnings. This time, he had come to them with yet another incredible business opportunity, one he simply couldn't afford to miss. He had promised them it was his golden ticket, a surefire way to turn his life around. But he needed capital immediately. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "We've decided to invest in your brother's business venture instead," he admitted. "We believe in him, and this could really be the turning point for him." I stared at them, unable to process what I was hearing. The money they had promised me, the money I had planned my future around, signed contracts based on, was gone. Just like that, handed over to my brother for another one of his doomed schemes. What about my house? I finally choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. My father forced a smile. "You're doing so well," he said, as if that would soften the blow. "You can keep saving for another year or two. You're always so good with money." It felt like a slap in the face. My financial responsibility was being used against me, while my brother's recklessness was being rewarded yet again. "I signed a contract," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll lose my earnest money. I'll look unreliable to lenders." My parents exchanged uneasy glances. My mother hesitantly suggested, "Maybe you can get a loan from somewhere else?" I was speechless. My hands were shaking as I asked them to leave. I needed space to think, to breathe, to process the betrayal. They left with half-hearted promises to make it up to me somehow. But I barely heard them. That night, I alternated between crying and making frantic phone calls, desperate to find another way to come up with the money. But no one I knew had that kind of cash to lend on such short notice. The next morning, I reached out to the sellers, hoping they would grant me an extension. They were sympathetic, but without a financial guarantee, they couldn't take their home off the market any longer. Just like that, my dreams slipped away. I lost the home, and I lost my $5,000 earnest money deposit. I was devastated. But more than that, I was furious. I threw myself into work, picking up extra projects, trying to drown my anger and heartbreak in productivity. I distanced myself from my parents, keeping my responses to their messages short and making excuses to avoid Sunday dinners. I needed time to heal, time to figure out how to move forward without the people who had let me down so profoundly. Then, just 3 months later, the inevitable happened. My brother's business crumbled before it had even properly begun. Through a cousin, I learned that he had barely gotten off the ground before blowing through every last cent of the investment. And my parents? They never brought up their broken promise again. The downfall of my brother's latest venture came as no surprise. His so-called business opportunity had unraveled almost as soon as it began, and within months he had burned through every cent of the money my parents had handed him. There was no miraculous turnaround, no newfound success, just another failed scheme in a long history of them. What did surprise me, however, was the message I received from my father last week. Family dinner this Sunday. Important news to share. Please come. Against my better judgment, I went. A part of me hoped, perhaps foolishly, that they had realized their mistake, that they would offer some kind of apology or at least an acknowledgement of the harm they had done. As I pulled into their driveway, my eyes immediately landed on something unfamiliar, a gleaming, brand-new SUV parked out front. A strange pang of unease settled in my stomach. Inside, my brother was sprawled on the couch, casually scrolling through the latest iPhone as if he hadn't just squandered a life-changing amount of money. My parents, meanwhile, were practically glowing with excitement. Dinner was a strained affair, everyone carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. I waited, forcing down bites of food, bracing myself for whatever important news had warranted my presence. Then, at last, my father raised his glass, tapping it lightly to gather our attention. "We have some exciting news," he announced, beaming. "Your mother and I have decided to retire early." I blinked. I hadn't expected that. "We're selling the house and buying an RV," he continued, pride swelling in his voice. "We're going to travel the country, see all the places we've always wanted to visit." I nodded politely, still unsure why any of this involved me. And then the bombshell dropped. "Since we'll be on the road," my mother chimed in, "we need someone responsible to manage our affairs." A creeping sense of dread curled around my ribs. "Bills, taxes, any issues with our rental properties, we thought of you immediately." I stared at them, speechless. After everything they had done, after destroying my chance at homeownership, after prioritizing my brother's reckless dreams over my carefully built plans, they wanted me to work as their unpaid property manager? And then my father added, as if bestowing some grand opportunity upon me, "We'll also need somewhere to stay when we come back to visit." He glanced at my mother, who smiled as she continued, "We were thinking we could list you as a co-owner on a small condo we'd buy in the city. You could live there and take care of it for us." For the briefest moment, hope flickered inside me. Co-ownership of a condo? Was this their way of making things right? Was this an attempt to repair the damage they had done? Of course, my mother quickly clarified, shattering any illusion that this was a genuine gesture. "It would be mostly in our names, for tax purposes, of course. And we'd need the master bedroom when we visit, but you could stay in the second bedroom during those times." The audacity of it all left me breathless. They weren't offering me a home. They were offering me a place to stay, conditionally, temporarily, a caretaker for a property they would still control. And then my brother, ever entitled, chimed in. "What about me? Where am I supposed to stay when you're gone?" "With your sister, of course," my father replied cheerfully. "There's a pull-out couch." That was it. That was the final straw. I pushed back my chair, grabbed my purse, and stood. "Where are you going?" my mother called after me, feigning concern. "We haven't discussed the details." I turned back to face them, my voice steady despite the anger roiling inside me. "I'm going home. To my apartment. The one I pay for myself. The one where I make all the decisions. I'm not managing your properties. I'm not becoming your part-time tenant. And I'm certainly not housing my brother." My father's expression darkened. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" His voice dripped with wounded indignation. I let out a bitter laugh. "Yes, family helps family. Or at least, that's how it's supposed to work." I paused, meeting their stunned expressions with unwavering resolve. "Let me know when you want to start." And with that, I walked out, ignoring the flurry of texts from my mother that followed, each one accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. The next morning, I made a decision. I called a real estate agent, not in my city, but in another where housing was still within reach. I had recently been offered a position at my company's branch office there, with a slight pay increase to account for the relocation. It wasn't what I had originally planned, and it meant leaving behind the life I had built, my friends, the familiar streets I had hoped to call home. But it was a place where I could afford to buy a house of my own, without anyone's permission, without strings attached, without broken promises looming over me. I also started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me untangle the deep-seated wounds my family had left behind. She helped me see that I wasn't being dramatic, that it was okay to set boundaries, that I didn't have to set myself on fire just to keep others warm. My parents still don't understand why I'm moving, why I turned down their so-called generous offer. My brother thinks I'm overreacting. Maybe in their eyes I am. But for the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. As for the condo I lost, the one I had poured my dreams into, the one I had imagined myself living in with a dog at my feet, I drove past it yesterday. The new owners had made it their own. A fresh row of flowers lined the front. A swing hung on the porch. A golden retriever lounged in the yard, lifting its head to bark happily as I passed. It hurt, seeing what could have been mine. But I refused to let that pain anchor me in the past. Instead, I'm choosing to focus on the future, on what will be mine someday. A home that belongs only to me. A life built on my own terms. I don't know if I'll ever fully repair my relationship with my parents. Right now, that's not my priority. Right now, I'm focused on something far more important, building a foundation of my own. One that no one can take away from me. One that no one else controls.